Welcome to the City Show. Today we have Whitney Reynolds, star of her own nationally syndicated talk show, The Whitney Reynolds Show. Based in Chicago, Whitney's lived a little bit around the country and has now called Chicago her home. And we're very honored to have you here today. Thank you for being a guest on our show.
I am so excited you had me at 86. You said I am an 86er and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is meant to be. We're the same age. We're both going for our dreams." And when I learned about what you're doing with this platform, I thought, "Of course, I have to be on."
Well, I really appreciate it, but you have a lot more practice than I do. So you're gonna come across very very natural because this is what you do. You could do this with your hands tied behind your back.
Though, it took a long time. I'll never forget my first time as a reporter in a very small market, and they had me stand on a box because I'm 5'1". And not only did I misread my name that was clearly in the teleprompter, but I also then fell off the box. And so if that could happen and I still am in television, you just get back up and do it again. So, now it's like a well-oiled machine because I've been doing it so long. But yeah, we all have those funny moments.
But I feel like moments like those where you're natural and kind of a human mistake happens while you're performing are the moments that show the audience that you're human, that you could also make mistakes and fumble.
It's funny because you're nailing it right on the head. I love to inspire people, whether it's through our television show or radio or even social media. And right before Thanksgiving, I lost this veneer, and people are so used to seeing everybody put together. And I ended up showing, I mean, not like a long shot of like, here I am missing a tooth, but it was one of those days that I had had a really rough day and I ended up showing it. And I had so many people send me messages that were like, "Whitney, thank you for keeping it real." And, it's one of those things that I totally agree. The more you can show your authentic self to people, the more people know who you truly are and why you're bringing your gift to the world.
While talking about authenticity, you define yourself as a storyteller who connects the dots, which is, I think, a message and a mission statement that resonates with a lot of people. So your show airs on PBS along other platforms. Side note, which I thought was really cool, Crane Chicago nominated you among the 40 under 40, which is, an amazing accomplishment. Without further ado, if I may get started with the questions for the day. So tell us about your meeting with Robert De Niro.
Well, that was very exciting. It was one of those moments of, we love everyday people on our show, but we also love when celebrities go there with their stories. And they were doing a big red carpet. And so this was a night of juggling. And luckily, being a twin mom and owning a national TV show, I have the juggling of plates and things down. And that was a red carpet that was very, very difficult because there were about 10 different people that they wanted you to interview. And in that moment, you also don't want to discredit anybody that might not be in the industry as long as Robert De Niro. And our goal as a show, is really to make everyone feel seen and to get there with their story. So that night, I was really keeping my notes of who was what, knowing that Robert was coming down and that, of course, we wanted a great interview with him. But I am from Oklahoma. And I had this mentality growing up that everyone literally has a story. I get in trouble all the time with my kids when we're grocery store shopping because I'm meeting friends on the bread aisle. They're like, "Mom, just load up your cart. Let's go." And so, in typical Whitney fashion, as the red carpet was going on and they were pushing the different people down, I had a little bit of a break and I saw this guy that I found fascinating. I complimented his leather coat. We started chatting. And sure enough, he was from my home state of Oklahoma and now lives out in California. And he is actually Robert's manager. And so I had the chance to talk with him, which just, it goes to show the more you really care about people, so doors open up. And so I became very fast friends with this man. And when it came time for my interview with Robert De Niro, I got a little bit more time with him, which really helped him go there with his story. And it was right before he broke the news about being a dad again, which was really exciting. So since that interview, I actually went out to LA and sat down with his manager again. And it turns out that he handles so many of the greats. So it was really, that night was one that opened many more doors, and also is still one of my lead pictures on Instagram because I had so much fun. And it was a reminder to me too that you can do multiple things and do them well. You just have to always stay grounded in your mission, which ours is caring about people and their stories.
And I think another message there is never judge a book by its cover. You never know who someone is or what their background is, and they could be, dressed in plain clothes and doing something fascinating, with top artists. You never know.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Never judge a book by its cover. Also, like never, I would say, downgrade anybody's dream, because when I started here in Chicago, it was one of those things of I had been in a small market, moved here, the job got cut, and I was selling shoes at the time. And the Cranes article for 40 Under 40 mentions this, but I was selling shoes, and nothing's more humbling than being at people's feet. And I was expressing my dreams to them. I'm like, I am going to have a TV show. At the time, it was not a national show, or that dream was like, as soon as I got the TV show, then it became the vision for national. But I remember telling people, like, I am going to do this. And, there were some people that really believed in it with me. And then there were some that were like, oh, I don't know, girl. And it's funny because, you got to lift each other up and really remind people they can go for it.
Absolutely. If someone has a dream, no matter how ridiculous it sounds, believe in them because they might just accomplish it.
Exactly.
And that's half the battle, isn't it?
It
Believing
is.
in your dream enough that it might actually come true. But you have to really, really believe it in order to pursue it and make it a reality. So there's apparently a Chicago Fashion Week. I didn't know this. There's New York Fashion Week. There's also Chicago Fashion Week.
Oh,
How
yeah.
does that compare to New York's Fashion Week? And does it attract a lot of big stars?
Well, I would love to say that I have sat front row in many, many New York shows, but I really haven't. I got asked last year by Nigel Barker to come to Fashion Week, and I'm still so frustrated that it didn't work out because I think I was at a shoot in Dallas or something like that. So I couldn't go. But what I love about Chicago fashion, my kids, one of our like chosen uncles for them. He is a fashion designer and he's laid his roots here in Chicago. He has since expanded to LA. But the fashion scene, because I've watched him grind over the years, he's done all my Emmy dresses. I know how important it is to support local artists, especially being a local, what I would consider artist, but just in media. We need to really lift each other up in our city, especially if you call this home. So, what I was so proud about Chicago Fashion Week is we had some people come into our city that moved here during COVID, and they said, we need to create this, bring it back, because there was a fashion week here prior, but they really needed to bring it back and bring it back in like a really great, strong way. And it was beautiful. It was nothing shy. The one I attended, I think, was opening night. And it was amazing. It blew my socks off. I felt like I was sitting front row in New York. It was so cool. The lighting, the sound, the music. Zaz Productions, who's done a ton of different productions for the industry whenever it comes to the fashion shows, she was handling it, Tracy. And I have to tell you, I was so impressed with our city. And, Chicago gets a bad rep a lot of the times on the news. And I always tell people when I'm sitting next to him in a plane, I'm like, that's not the Chicago I know. The Chicago I know, and I tape in Lawndale, I tape in one of the neighborhoods that makes news a lot. The Chicago I know, I can walk my kids to school. I can, go to the local place and go grab dinner and walk there. I can go to Fashion Week and see some great designers. We have Broadway plays. I mean, Chicago's really, I would say, I don't want to say a hidden gem because people know about it, but it truly is one of those places that as soon as I moved here and I realized I could make my dream happen here, I doubled down and I'm like, I'm laying new roots.
Well, let's be honest, the media does exaggerate, all of the bad, right? Whether it's crime, whether it's, I mean, the social injustice issues are real, but the crime is usually exaggerated. I mean, you're not going to walk on the street and, end up in an altercation every day you're living life in Chicago, right? I mean, generally
Well,
speaking, most people are functional, right?
I
They're
think you
living
have to be
life and
smart. When I was an intern at Good Morning America, I was never like on the subway just fiddling with my Louis and all my Mac and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't doing that. I would, I sat on the subway and I kept my bag close to me. I always was attentive. And I would say anytime, no matter where you are, even if you were, in God's country in the South, you always have to be aware. I mean, it's a busy world, and so that's what I would say about Chicago. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, does the crime upset me? Absolutely. Does knowing that we do have gangs in our city upset me? Of course it does. But it is an amazing city to call home, and really, I'm seeing people double down here, and I love that.
that's great. So you interviewed Dan Aykroyd, one of the original Ghostbuster actors and a long-standing Saturday Night Live star. What did you find most interesting about the man and his career?
So this interview was also unique because it was a night that he was launching one of his new lines. And it was a line of alcohol. And it was really cool because you're kind of reminded going into an interview where we've all known him for, SNL, My Girl, or, all of his other comedies, Ghostbusters. But yet you see how versatile he is. Like he is one of those people that's expanding in other realms too. My outside of TV for me, my husband and I do real estate. We don't sell it, we buy it, rent them, all that kind of stuff. And so I was really going into the interview just like so proud of the fact he is so versatile and is not just in one lane. And so when we were in the interview, they had all the different journalists there, and you're in my studio with me today. So I like both sets of interviews where I'm on location or where I'm in my studio, but my studio is much more controlled. And so right before I start interviewing Dan, they bring in the VIP fans. So it is like we are having a live Whitney Reynolds show right there. And so I sit down. There is now probably 50 people in the room. And of course, I want to talk about his acting career, but it's so important that we talk about really what he wants us to talk about, which was the new launch of his line that night. And so it was really this beautiful interview of making me understand how to navigate his story in a way because he's not just Ghostbusters, even though the new Ghostbusters was phenomenal. He's not just SNL. He is a human with a story. And so I wanted to understand his intricate details about, is he funny at home? Was he always one of these people that knew he was going to do this for a living? And the interesting thing is, he was telling me that a lot of it had to do with his journey to Chicago. So he's Canadian. And it was interesting when he was like, I am an immigrant. And a lot of people forget that about his story. And so he was super resilient with opening up about that. And his interview was one at the end, he surprised me with his little conehead voice with, you're watching the Whitney Reynolds show. And it took everything in me not to just bust out laughing. And luckily, because we did have that live audience, they all clapped afterwards. And I felt like, oh, should do this more often in front of an audience. That was fun.
Well, interestingly, he's actually originally from Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And Dan Aykroyd's father was an engineer for Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of the current Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. So it's a
Look
small
at
world.
you, Mr. Textbook.
Well, I'm Canadian, so I
Yeah,
was fascinated by that fact.
I need to get you on my research team. I love that's a good detail.
It's my lawyer side coming out. So you interviewed Alison Brie, a main actress on the TV show Mad Men. What did you find most interesting about the woman and her career?
Oh, I got to interview both her and her husband together. One, my husband's name is David, and I loved it because she kept calling him Davy during the interview. So I get home that week and I'm like, okay, David, your name is no longer David. You are Davy to me. So it was just so cute to see a family that both is in the industry and not being jealous of each other, both lifting each other up. That's the hard part. When I got into television and I was single, the last thing I wanted to do was marry someone in the industry because there's this like sometimes, I don't want to say competitiveness. I don't even know what it is, but it's there sometimes. And it was so cool to see such a dynamic couple like really owning their space, and they worked together in this movie they did. The movie was hilarious. It was one where there's even like a scene of her streaking, and it was all about like the story itself was beautiful. I mean, it helped whenever we were explaining it to our viewers, like their personal story and the story of the movie both were very deep. So it pulled out two different angles. But going back to this streaking scene, so I read the books when we talk to authors, I watch the movies. And so I'm trying to multitask because this interview is coming up. So I have my laptop in the kitchen, and I'm a twin mom, and I was trying to cook dinner, which I'm not great at cooking. And I'm watching the movie as I'm doing all this, and the streaking scene comes on. And right about then, at the time, I think he was like 5 or 6 year old son walks by and was like, "Mom, what are you watching?" And so I was like, "Oh my gosh, don't burn maybe let the potatoes burn, but shut my laptop." And so it was really a funny movie because it was really, really deep. And then it also had these scenes that just make you laugh. And then getting to know them on the personal level, knowing that they did this together is truly amazing.
And in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie were not married. And then eventually, with time, they decided to get married. And I think it was after that movie. And so, anyone who says if you're starring in a movie and you're playing an intimate role with somebody, that there's no human connection that develops from that, maybe for some, but I would imagine, for a lot of boys and girls starring in movies, it must create some sort of romance in the real world as well.
I'm not necessarily sure about romance, but I just can say on our team, like I've had the same director for 15 years, and he knows me so well. And that is like the beauty of working with a team, that like the trust and the love and all that is there. Like even my supervising producer, 15 years as well. Like it's crazy. They've been with me from the start of the show. And so there is definitely a connection beyond just, oh, we work together, we clock in, all that kind of stuff. But there definitely is more. I consider them like family. Yeah.
I was speaking specifically when two stars play a romantic role on screen and how
Yeah,
that
I've never done
translates
that.
outside. But
Most the most I played was Carrie Ann and Davy Crockett. So,
well, that's cool.
and that was when I was
That
in sixth grade. So I don't know, but I just know from the human connection of just being around people every day that you are both in the same sphere and creative mind. There definitely is a common bond for sure.
for sure. So you covered the Chosen TV series, which premiered in LA.
Yeah.
Fascinating show about the story of Jesus. Wouldn't you say it takes a special kind of actor to star in a show or a movie that takes place 2,000 years ago? I figure the actors have to be, kind of a history buff in order to, perform the scene well and perform
Well, it's
in the
very
movie
interesting
well.
because I have been a big fan of Dallas Jenkins for a while. He is just, I would say, a phenomenal, talented brain in television. He comes from a line of talented people in television. And what I love about what he's done, and it's very similar to the Whitney Reynolds show, is if you watch season one, it's very, very different from season nine that we're working on right now. And you can tell because the funding was different. The mission was still there though. And that's what I love about what he's done is you can see how it's grown. They made a big announcement this week, I believe. I saw it on my scrolling on Instagram that I believe that now they are partnering with Amazon on some front. When I had interviewed them last year, they had just brought on people from like major movies that helped do a Lionsgate deal. I mean, that's huge stuff. And like when you've created something from the ground up and you own it, same with, yes, I'm on PBS and yes, I'm nationally syndicated, but I own the show, is one of those things that when you look at those big numbers and you have those big dreams, it can be very scary. But he stayed so true to the mission. And so to watch them, they have like billboards up in Times Square right now, like to watch how it's grown. And you know what was interesting in my interview? They didn't call it a Christian TV show. They're calling it literally like history, like what you were saying, following this moment in history. And so I would say the hardest part with the interview for me is like, what do you say to Jesus? Like that was my thing. Like, Okay, I'm walking in, like wearing a full turtleneck that day. My cross was under. No, I'm just joking. But no, it was really cool, and that's what Jonathan Rumi reminds us of: is that he's not Jesus, he's an actor that plays Jesus. And so it's really cool because in his interview, which I would highly recommend people pull up, we got to talk about the pressure that it does come with playing such a big role. But if you think about it, and we dig deep for your listeners right now, we all have a major role in our life that holds us some accountability. And how do we do that and do it well? And that's where he really goes in that interview.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing. So, Whitney, you earned an Emmy nomination. Tell us more
Two,
about that.
two.
Two, two Emmy
Well, I have one
nominations.
though, just putting it out there.
So tell us more about your Emmy nominations.
The Emmy nomination world is, I would say, the wild, wild west. I have judged for Emmys. It's one of those things that when you're in our industry, you really want the accolades. However, I interviewed this woman last week, Anne Marie Anderson, and she reminded me that getting to the no sooner makes it easier to get to the yes. And so back in the day when we got our first Emmy nomination, it was one of those moments. It was before I had twins. My twins are 8 now. And it was with this guy that really had been through a lot as a veteran, and he opened up about being in this special force and then coming home from serving in such a big role, and how do we integrate back into society as a whole. And we went there, we talked about PTSD. And Johnny, after his interview, Johnny Van, we kept up. And it was one of those things that I got to watch his mission keep unfolding. And so for him to be my first Emmy nomination, he since passed away. He passed away last year. And but for him to be my first Emmy nomination, it I couldn't have asked for a better friend and interview, because he has touched my family's life. Um, I mentioned he passed away, but we had gotten so close over the years that when he moved to Arizona, we were actually thinking about spring breaking with his family. Like his
Oh
story,
wow.
when I first met him, he couldn't even go there with his story. This was years before. And then we were doing a show on veterans, and I said, Johnny, you're the perfect interview for this. And, and he was a big guy, big and strong and tough. And, not everybody wants to go there with their stories, but with our show, that's what we ask people to do. And he did. And that's why that Emmy nomination, I'm so proud of that one. People ask me what my favorite interview is. I'm like my kids, I don't have a favorite, but do I? But the veteran show to this day, and the fact that Johnny went there with his story and he dug deep, will forever be with me, no matter who we interview. So that was my first Emmy nomination, which was amazing. The fashion designer from Chicago made my dress. He does all my Emmy dresses, Boris Powell. And then the second one was for PSAs, because my show can only compete in the daytime Emmys, which, if you know your other daytime talk show hosts, they have a much bigger budget than we do. And so the PSA was for our local category and for public service announcement. And so that was really neat too, because it was a healing circle and a different approach to healing after a violent crime had been committed. So staying on point with our mission with both our submissions. And then this year we'll be back competing in the daytimes, going for best daytime host. We'll see. And then we're also
I'm voting for you.
yes,
I'm voting for you, Whitney.
yeah, I wish you would be my judge, but then you'd have to say I can't judge hers because I know her.
Oh, is that a requirement?
It is. It is. Yeah, I judged a category, and I there was a couple people that I was like, oh, I would love for them to win, but you can't do that. Nope, nope, nope. You have to say I actually know them.
Well, actually, if you're a jury member on a criminal case, it functions the same way. I mean, if you know the defendant, you can't be a juror. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
you know, I guess there's no reason why it shouldn't be the same in judging someone in the entertainment world,
100%.
entertainment and
Although I sometimes
information
wish it
world,
wasn't, because I'd probably have a stack full of them. I always joke because my
for
kid's
sure.
goddad is a local newscaster. He was from New York. came back to Chicago, but he has so many Emmys in his house. And I'm like brunching there on Sundays. I'm like, you better keep count on these Emmys. There's going to be one in my purse. I'm
Where
just
does he
kidding.
store them all?
He has them in his office, but I'm joking. I would never steal Stefan's Emmys.
I wouldn't blame you for it. Well, Whitney, it was a pleasure having you on our show. Thank you for joining the City Show as a guest. It was an honor to have you, Whitney Reynolds from the Whitney Reynolds Show. And to our guests, thank you for tuning in to the City Show. We drop an episode every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at The City Show Official and at The City Show, respectively. And until next time, we hope you enjoyed this journey and keep exploring your city. There's always more to discover.